Hi, welcome to the Account Exec webinar. We're having a look at the basics of Account Exec, Small Business Edition this morning, and how we get around the application, how we do some basic setup like setting up nominal accounts, and how we process some basic transactions. So you should be able to see the startup screen of Account Exec with the dashboard showing, which is a core information display showing just sales and costs, and on the right hand side over here your tasks, outstanding tasks, for which all of mine are red triangle at the moment, which means they're all overdue. So the application can be navigated initially by the main buttons at the top here. What you can do, if I want to have a look at the sales area, I simply click the sales button, and the purchases area, the purchases, and they're grouped by functional requirements. Under the cash book, you'll be surprised to find we find the cash accounts, and ledgers we find journals and nominal accounts. So if we look in sales as an example, under here you will expect to find the customers, and indeed this is the customer listing here. These sub-tabs allow us to change what we see in the main area underneath the main button display. So if I want to look at sales quotes or sales orders or sales transactions, I simply change the tab. All these tabs do is change the information that's displayed in the main area of the screen here. This display type is called a grid. There are other types in the system. There are menus or menu buttons and some diary displays and some of the other applications that we do. The primary application type you'll see though is a grid. Now grids contain lists in this case of customers. So if I'm clicking on this particular customer, A&J Hilton for example, and I was to double click, it will open the customer's account in this case. Likewise, if I went to a transactions display and I double clicked a transaction again for A.J. Hilton, this happens to be a payment, the payment details will open. Take me through the allocation process. Or, not to labour the point, orders, if I double click that, it's opening up a sales order. The boxes you see at the top of the display here, and all of the grids are similar in that they all have different types of entries in them, are filters. And all these do is filter what you can see. So for example, if I was looking for the Adesso customer, I can type parts of the name and it will filter the grid down. Once you go past 4 characters entered into the box, the grid will automatically respond and there's no need to hit enter. If you just have a couple of characters, you need to hit enter and then it will filter. These characters can be anything from the name. So if I typed ESSO, I'm finding all the customers with that string, as you can see in the middle of espresso there, and Adesso as 2 cases in point. The same is true of all of the filter fields. So if I was to put in 10088, that's the email, that was clever, 10088, that filters down to Adesso. If I was to put in ESSO, same as I did before, and then put a part of the phone number in, the grid will filter down using both fields. I could have achieved the same thing with the name. Typically one field is enough to find most information, but if you do need to filter by more, you can do so. This type of drop-down box will change immediately what you see. So in this case, there's no customer with those parameters on that is not active. All will simply give me all available. On the right-hand side of the display, you will typically see either 2, namely this button and this button available, and sometimes 3, which includes this one. This button will refresh the display. That does exactly the same thing as changing the filters on the left-hand side. It's there because in certain instances, it's possible that the display will not automatically refresh. That's typically because of date fields, and we do that for efficiency, purely because if you skip through the date calendars, then the system is attempting to change every time you stop on a date, having jumped a month, and so on, which can slow things down considerably. So in those instances, we put in a refresh button. If the grid doesn't display, simply click this button and it will refresh anyway. It's also there because if you want to refresh a display that's already set, you just want to see some changes in it, and it hasn't automatically refreshed in those particular circumstances, you can do so. The button adjacent to that is a clear filters button. It's actually a little filter with an X in it. And if I click this, if I just set this one as well, for instance, if I click this now, all three of those filters will clear back to the default. Now that is useful if you have set a number of filters. If you're doing a more complex search on something like a transactions display, it can be that you've set 3 or 4, and particularly date items. It can be useful to reset. And then finally over here, this is the select all, select top records filter. So what this does, by default, the system will only recover somewhere between 20 and 30 records back to your client. That's deliberate in order to make things quicker. It's a bit like the page displays on a typical web page where it says page 1, 2, 3, 4 and next on the bottom of the display. You find those on most commercial sites. This will bring down the top 30 displays. It's easier just to filter for what you're looking for, but if you want to bring every record that's in the database back, you can do so. Do so with caution, however, because it may take a while to respond. Now in this case, you can see my data is now taking a short time to respond. I now have, I think there are 1,000 customers in this display now, and you can scroll through them all, looking for what you want. And reset it by clicking it again. Now it's gone back to the top display only. I'm going to go to this display to demonstrate a point to do with dates. Now date filters, these are standard Windows components, and you will see these in many applications, but they're very commonly misunderstood. The first thing to note is that all calendar displays have a Today button on them at the bottom there. You can click that and it will go to today's date. If you've set the date, you can obviously scroll through dates in the way that I've just done, but you can also click the month and the date will zoom out, so I want to move to January, or I can click the month and the year. Now I can move back a number of years, or I can click the month and the year again, and now I've got chunks of years. And it makes it easier to select dates that are well in the past by doing that. I can always click to today's date and it will jump straight back to today's date. Where we have date pairs in our system, it is always the case that you can right-click. Now this is functionality to Account Exec. If you right-click any date pair, you can click today or the last 7 days. You can see the dates changing, or you could go forward 7 days, or whatever particular setting you want. This is a very effective way of shortcutting date filters. And dates, of course, can always be changed. So if I wanted to set this to the 1st of the 1st, 2017, I simply do that. I'm doing that using the left and right arrow keys, as opposed to the Enter key, which will move and cause a filter to happen. And finally, if you want to take the dates off completely, you can, of course, uncheck it, and now all transactions, irrespective, depending on what's over here, will be filtered. So if I wanted to see everything, for example, for FT Sutton, I can do so by simply typing the characters that correspond to the name, or just Sutton. Do the same thing, and that's all the transactions from that particular customer's account. That is exactly the same thing as going to a customer's display, and if I type in here and saying I want to view the transactions, and there they are, same ones. Okay, so that's the basics of navigating using a grid, using filters, using the right-click button. So just to go over that again, main buttons will take you in and out of areas. The sub-tabs will filter the type of display in the area that you're looking at. In this case, we're looking at customers. The filter boxes will filter by part of character names, and they will automatically respond past 4 characters. Drop-down boxes obviously filter the moment you select an item. The buttons over here, this refreshes the display, this clears the filters, and this will recover all records or the top section of records depending on how it's set. Clear is the top section, filled in is all records. To enter into a record in the display, in this case a customer's record, we double click and it opens up the edit field, the edit box for this particular customer, or whatever particular type of display you happen to be in. Finally, we come to the buttons at the bottom of the display. These are action buttons, so these do things. Everything else on this screen will filter information, it will show you information, it will change what you see, but it doesn't actually carry out any action to the data itself. Down the bottom here, now we start getting into things, buttons that actually do things. So if I want to add a new customer, I'm in the customers area, so I'm in the customer, so the add button means add customer because that's where I am. If I was in orders, the add button would mean add a sales order. I can click the add, and now a blank or a new customer window opens up. I'm going to type in test customer and save that. If I filter, there's my test customer 2, and I can go back in and change whatever I want. I don't have to have saved it when I did. I can edit this over time, make changes to it. These buttons will do pretty much what they say on the tin. One other thing to point out here is, you saw me do it a little earlier, is under most grids, pretty much all actually, the system has a right-click option. So if I right-click, in this case, I get a series of shortcut options for this particular record, in this case, a customer. So if I wanted to remove that customer, I can try to do so. Incidentally, the system will stop you doing that if there are reasons why that can't be removed, so transactions being an example of why you might not be able to remove a customer. But I shall remove this test customer because there's nothing on it. The system says, okay, let's remove it, and it's gone. That does exactly the same thing as this button down here, which I'm going to click in this case, and the system is going to say no, customer has transactions, and the reason for that is because you can see that this customer has balance. If I double click it, there are transactions in this customer's account. Clearly we can't remove a customer that has transactions on it. All these buttons do something like, for example, in this case, I could print a sales card. Okay, or if you have our dial systems, our phone integration systems, you could call the customer. In case it says, do you want to call the contact of the customer? Dial. It says no, you can't because there's no record there. In this case here, this button, which is on pretty much every grid display, pops the right-click menu. And why would you do that when you can just right-click on the record? Well, the simple answer to that is that if you are using a touchscreen, accessing right-click menus is nuisance because you have to usually hold down for a number of seconds before the right-click option pops up. In our case, you click the record you want with your finger and then click the right-click button and then select the option. However, when you're using a touchscreen, it's usually easier just to click one of the main buttons at the bottom. It's only if you wanted to use a shortcut you would do that. So that's the basic navigation principles of the system. The only other buttons which we haven't talked about are these ones here, and these are on every display. As you might imagine, that exits the system, does exactly the same thing as clicking the X button in the top right corner, which incidentally, for those of you who are still have been told that clicking the X button on a software application is not a good idea, those things died a long time ago. So I hope there's nobody out there that still thinks that's the case. If you click the X button, it does exactly the same thing as the exit button, and the software will close safely. This button will take you back to the login screen. I didn't show you the login because it's difficult to get the webinar to pick up on the login screen. However, that will take you back to login. It's typically used by customers who've got multiple users on the same computer and they want to leave it ready for the next user to log straight back in again. That button will switch companies if you are operating a multi-company system. Remember that Account Exec in the small business version is multi-company, and in the enterprise version is multi-company, multi-currency. And then finally here, for those of you who are business partners and have clients who are on the system, then you click on this button here and your clients will appear in this list. I only have one, and you can actually switch into their system. So I shall do that now. I'm now looking at my client system, which in this case is blank. And if I wanted to go back to my own system, log into Advisor system, I can do so here. And you can see the display changes. Okay, sales. So there's my sales display again, so back where we started. Now, just to reiterate the basic layout of the application, obviously, to set up, you would typically go to settings. That's not exclusively true. Ledgers contains the accounts and VAT returns and financial periods, and we'll have a look at those in a minute, but we're just going to pop into settings and have a look at how this functions. Now, this is one of a number of examples inside the system where there's a number of other buttons under the main button heading. The reason we do this is because if we were to put all of those on tabs, which would be consistent with the user layout that we use elsewhere, there would simply be too many of them and it gets messy. So the easier way to do this is to put this in button order. These are alphabetical in sequence. So if you're trying to find something, then the button will be in alphabetical order. So if I wanted to have a look at cash accounts, I simply click on cash accounts and I'll now see a tab with cash accounts on it and a list of cash accounts. And I now have a button, again, action buttons down the bottom here, which allow us to add a cash account. So let's put in a test cash account. Preferably one that's not in Danish kroner. That cash account, incidentally, is multi-currency. Hence the reason for the symbol on it. The default, sometimes these displays will contain a default on them, simply means the one that will be used first in most circumstances. It does not mean you can't use the others. So if I go to the cash book, there's the cash accounts, there's my test cash account, ready to use. There's a whole range of things in here, most of which are preset, ready to operate, so you don't need to change them. A couple of things that are worth pointing out, however, you may wonder what they actually mean. Parameters has got yet more options in it, where you'll find hopefully some meaningful description to tell you what that option actually means. And it's logically divided up. Most of this is preset to operate without you needing to change it. This data here about the company is simply your account information, your first company information. And if you change that, it changes the company information as well that you've got registered, the default company. Okay. It's worth pointing out here for clients who are not VAT registered, the best thing, the system contains a default registration setting, and you might want to remove that for clients who are not VAT registered so that the VAT is not implied. If you have clients who are both registered and then deregistered and then registered again because they're bumping it out of the, or companies that are bumping in and out of VAT registration thresholds, it's possible to add a VAT registration, which will automatically be set, in this case, to a deregistration. Pick up the deregistration date and save that in. Now from the 1st of April onwards, this company is now deregistered, and then if they go back into registration, say some months later, then you can re-register them, and the system will automatically take care of that for you as required. I'm just going to remove those extra ones. The warning about parameters, incidentally, is because some of the system parameters are held in memory, and you simply need to restart your client once having made a significant change to it. We'll leave you to wander through. I'm not proposing to cover all of these areas. The ones I just do want to point out, if you have an advisor working with your business, these are fictional advisors in my test system, you can give them access to your system and your client in the same way that you have access to a client system if you're an accountant, but marketing advisors might be advising accountants or advising clients or business consultants and so on and so forth. Anybody who has a partner status will appear on this list, and a client can then approve them into their system by simply double-clicking, selecting the security profile from their own system they want to apply to users from their advisor's system. Staying with me on this one, and save, and now in this case Chancery accounts, whoever they may be, are able to access my system from their version of that button. If you want to remove them, you simply remove them, and that's it. They no longer have access. Okay. The other thing to point out is this question of client devices. This is also inside your web portal as well. if you log in a new computer, not a new user, but a new computer to your system, it will automatically go into a locked out mode to stop it getting any further access until an administrator comes onto the system using a computer that's already been approved and approves the device. The first client, when you first create your account, is automatically approved because it makes no sense to lock it out. Thereafter, they will need approval from a device which has access already pre-approved. If, however, you get into a situation where, for example, a computer will be to be destroyed and you simply can't get access because of it, you can always use your web portal to do it. That's the reason for that. And if you're really stuck, you can always call us because we can always do it for you, okay, if need be. You will have to prove your credentials in that case. It's a safety measure because this is a hosted system, and if somebody were to get your account credentials, your username, your password, and your account code, they could in theory set up another device to access your system. However, that's the final line of defense. Having got past all three of those codes, they would then need to have the system approved by an approved device, and that they simply won't be able to do unless they've got access to that physical device, or they have access to your web portal. Hence, you must keep the web portal secure. Okay, so let's have a look at some basic setup work inside the system. So this is the ledgers, and these are financial accounts. So this is your nominal ledger setup. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add an account to demonstrate the point. So a very simple setup. The company is the one you happen to be logged into, which is us at this point in time. The category is the statutory reporting category as they currently exist. You cannot change these. These are system controlled. You just simply decide which one the nominal code sits in. That is ready for us to enable the system for statutory accounts reporting. Then you have a report group. Now, the reporting group is entirely up to you. Okay, so you can select whichever one you want this to be in. I'm going to put this in turnover. And those can be set up to your needs and your requirements, and they do control the formatting of the P&L reports. Then a description, test turnover account. And I'm going to give it a nominal code. You can have up to 20 characters, alphanumeric, whatever configuration you like. The only stipulation on the nominal code is it has to be unique in that company. Click Save. Okay. Now, I don't like that nominal code, so actually I've made a mistake. It's not the right sequence. I can't even find it now. There it is down the bottom there. And I want to change it. So I could search for my test account. I could have searched with 5, 6, whatever the number was. 5687, 5687, oops, 567, and I find it using the path nominal code. And I'm going to open that account up, and I'm going to change it to something more meaningful. And there it is. You can change nominal codes as much as you need or want to within our software. There are no restrictions on that at all. The system under the hood doesn't actually use them. It uses a special integer key to identify transactions. So the nominal code is entirely for you to change and play with and format to your requirements as you see fit. So that's how you create a nominal account. Obviously, there is a default chart of accounts in there. Feel free to take them out, to edit them, to change them, do what you want. The only exception to that is you will find some accounts which are system controlled. So if I, for example, open this one here, you'll see that it's a system control account. Now you can never set an account to a system control. These are there automatically. You can change the nominal code, you can change the description, you can change the report group, but you cannot change the category. And you cannot remove the account. It's there to control the ledger that's locked into it. In this case, purchase ledger control. There's one for sales ledger control, there's one for cash book, and so on. And basically the ones you would expect there to be control accounts for. The system locks them out. You can't post into them, and you can't adjust them. They are there to keep the ledger in control. The way to post transactions into them is to go through the ledger itself, should you need to do so. Okay. So that's how you set up a nominal account. Financial periods, these are set up in any sequence, any number of dates you want. The only stipulation is they have to follow on from each other. So you could have one financial period for an entire year, and every one of your periods is a year end. You could have 10 in a year, you could have 13 in a year. If you're extending your financial period, you could have 18 in a year or 20 in a year. It's entirely up to you. So this will accommodate any configuration of management and year-end reporting that you need or choose to put in place. You can see down the side here, these indicate a normal financial period, in this case months, and the checkered flag indicates a year-end point. This is an automatic period that's put in, it's the opening balance, it's how the system is cast on when you're setting it up to start. Okay, we're doing covering the setup of a system with starting posting and putting in opening balances in a later webinar. So I'm going to add in a financial period to the system. You can see it's automatically locked on to the last one. It's set it to a month by default, but if I wanted to set this to an 18-day period, let's set it to test period. That's a description, be whatever you like. Say that. And this is a code. Now this is up to 3 characters. And the reason for this is what will show in the transaction displays indicating where transactions have been allocated to what periods to make it clear. Okay, save that in. And if I scroll down, you'll see there's the test period. Now if I wanted to edit that, and let's say I want to make that a year, so I'll use my date filters. Set that to an accounting year. And I'm going to make it a year-end period now. So now I've got a year-end period running for 12 months. Actually, in this case, 13 months, because I'll skip forward one. So let's skip back one. Okay. Yep. So that's now a 365-day accounting period. So you can set these up for whatever purpose you want. When you are closing an accounting period, you simply right-click to edit, close the period, or in this you could do down the bottom here, click and close period, and that's all there is to it. If you need to reopen it, reopen the period, there you go. That's as much drama as is involved in putting accounting periods in. VAT returns are essentially the same. They're simpler. They will automatically default to quarters, but you can set again these to any dates you need to. So if I was having a short VAT period, for some reason, I can do that. Or I could set it to a normal quarter, or if the revenue had decided I was on monthly payments or monthly VAT returns, I can now start going on to monthly ones. The system doesn't mind, doesn't care, and the process of closing returns is exactly the same. You simply close. The only stipulation with both financial periods and VAT returns is that they must be closed in sequence and reopened in sequence. It doesn't make sense not to do that, of course. We'll be covering more on transaction period cutoffs and how to manage those and some of the more advanced features on that in later webinars. Okay, finally, I'm going to very quickly put in a customer and demonstrate the entry of a invoice transaction, and that's where I'll conclude this session before we all die of boredom. So I'm going to add a test customer, and I'm going to save that. Now, the reason I'm using the Save button is because I don't want to leave this form, so that's a quick way of doing it. You'll notice the button's reset. This is now in the database ready to go, and I can now access these other tabs. The Customer tab is edit form is an interesting example of one of the larger forms inside the system where there are lots of sub-areas and sub-actions. The layout of these forms is very similar to the main screen. You've got a series of tabs that filter. Obviously, we don't have filters on this because this is a layout form, but if I was looking at transactions, there are filters there as well, and the same buttons apply. So this is like a sub-area of the main screen almost. And the action buttons change depending on what screen I happen to be in. So I've now got buttons that tell me I can do transactions here. If I was in the order screen, I can add an order to the system, and quotes likewise. Or appearing here for the first time in these particular displays, tasks. So I can attach tasks to a customer. So if I wanted to add a task for the administrator user, I'm not being very innovative. Click Save. I've now added a task to this user. That could be debt follow-up, could be to track in a meeting. These are features that are coming from the CRM technology, and they're available in more limited forms inside of the Account Exec basic product. So I can add a transaction here to this customer from inside the customer's account, but I can also do this from, let's filter that down. I can also do this from here, add invoice, or add invoice here. So I'm just going to right click, add the invoice from there. Today's date, well, let's make that the 9th because that's the actual date of the invoice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the reference. VAT, I'm scrolling up and down using my arrow keys, or you could use the drop down, but it's quicker using your arrow keys. The VAT is automatically adjusting. Put in the amount, the gross amount of the invoice. Hit enter once you're ready to move on to the next form. First thing the system does is throw you up into your nominal account listing. Now, here's one I prepared earlier. Filtered straight down, hit enter. If I don't need to do any other changes, I don't need to put in more transactions or analysis lines, job done. And that was a very, very basic invoice processed. If I was to go to the purchase ledger, it's exactly the same process. Clearly, I'm entering a purchase invoice. So I hope that gives you an introduction into how to get around the application. So we've looked at the main buttons and the filters and the tabs, the action buttons. We've looked at how the settings area works with its main button screens and how to get around that. And we've had a look at how you set up a nominal ledger account, a VAT return, a financial period, and some basic, very, very quick basic customer setup and customer transactions. There's clearly a great deal more the software is capable of doing, and we'll be returning to more features as we go through various webinars. So I hope that's been useful, and we'll see you again soon.